Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into one of the most seductive and most fatal myths of the Middle Ages, the Siren's song. You've probably seen her in paintings or fairy tales. A flawless mermaid lounging on a rock, humming a tune sweet enough to melt steel. Enchanting, mysterious, romantic. Yeah, not even close. The real medieval siren wasn't some Disney daydream. She was wrought and feathers, talons and teeth. A voice sharpened into a weapon. Sailors didn't fall for her because they were weak. They fell because no human brain could resist the sound of their own destruction sung back at them. This wasn't a love story. It was neurological warfare. And by the end of tonight, you'll realize that if you'd heard her voice, you wouldn't have stood a chance either. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. Your ship is no sleek beauty with sails snapping heroically against the wind. It's more like a floating coffin, cobbled together by desperate men with no better job prospects. The timbers moan with every wave, and you're fairly certain the rats gnawing in the shadows are sturdier than half the nails holding the vessel together. Everything is damp, always. Your bedding, if you can call it that, smells like it was last dried during the reign of Charlemagne. The ship groans like it doesn't want to be here, and honestly, neither do you. You roll over, but there's no escape from the stench. Sweat and old ale cling to your crewmates like perfume. They snore like pigs, choking on their own tongues. You try to ignore the itch crawling across your skin, but the fleas and lice that made your hair their homeland refuse to be silenced. Modern shampoo doesn't exist. You couldn't even pronounce the word. Instead, you scratch until you bleed, feeding the vermin that treat your body like an endless banquet. This is how the day begins, with you scratching, gagging, and questioning why you didn't just stay home and till dirt like everyone else. Above deck, the world is no kinder. The air outside cuts sharp and cold, whipping your face with salt spray. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction, gray and merciless. The waves aren't playful. They rise like walls threatening to topple your fragile wooden box into the abyss. You grip the railing until your knuckles ache, pretending that will save you if the ship goes under. Spoiler, it won't. If you fall in, you'll sink fast, weighed down by wool, leather, and panic. No one is jumping in after you, not out of cruelty, just practicality. Better one man dead than all of them lost trying to fish out a fool. You think perhaps you could cling to the hope of food, but meals on this ship are punishments masquerading as sustenance. The cook ladles you a bowl of gray mush that was once peas, maybe a century ago. It tastes like the bottom of a boot. Bread comes hard enough to chip a tooth, salted fish reeks of decay, and water is something you dream about but never drink. Instead, you swig ale, warm and sour, because it's safer than water crawling with invisible death. Hydration comes at the price of constant buzz nausea. Congratulations. You're drunk, seasick, and still starving. And yet, this misery isn't the true danger. Hunger, filth, and cold are only the prologue. Because one night, as the ship drifts under a bruised sky, you hear it. A sound that doesn't belong to wind or wave. A voice, faint but sweet, threading through the crashing surf like silver through cloth. You stiffen, and so does the crew. At first, you convince yourself it's nothing, just the wind playing tricks, or your brain finally snapping under endless deprivation. But then it comes again, clearer this time, curling into your ear like smoke. Soft, lilting, beautiful, too beautiful. The men around you shift uneasily. One clutches his crucifix, another mutters a prayer, but their eyes glaze with hunger of a different kind. You feel it too, this aching pull in your chest, dragging you toward the sound. Every instinct tells you it means death. Every instinct also begs you to follow. It's a paradox no medieval man could survive. You tell yourself you're stronger, smarter, a modern mind trapped in an ancient nightmare. But the truth? The truth is simple, brutal, and humiliating. Your Spotify playlist never tried to drown you. This one will. It begins so faintly you think you've imagined it. A thread of sound woven into the roar of the sea, too delicate to be real, too perfect to exist in the brutal world you've been enduring. At first you dismiss it as wind whistling through the rigging, or the groan of the hull straining against another heavy swell. But then the note rises, slow and deliberate, as though someone plucked it from the sky and placed it directly inside your ear. It is not a sound meant for this world, and it does not matter whether you believe in sorcery or saints. The voice has already bypassed your beliefs and sunk straight into your brain. You freeze. Your crewmates freeze. All around you, men hardened by storms and starvation suddenly look like frightened children hearing a lullaby they cannot resist. The song thickens, no longer a whisper but a melody, winding over the foam with an elegance that defies description. It has none of the raw body joy of tavern music, none of the thudding rhythm of marching drums. This is something higher, something that belongs to a realm untouched by filth and toil. And yet, you understand instinctively that it wants nothing good for you. Beauty does not equal safety. Beauty can be a trap sharper than any spear. The problem is that your body doesn't care about logic. Your heart thrums in time with the notes, your throat aches to hum along, your legs twitch toward the edge of the deck as if pulled by invisible strings. The men around you sway, mouths parted, some already leaning dangerously far over the railing. One lets out a drunken laugh that isn't laughter at all, more like the hiccup of someone whose mind has slipped its leash. The voice has hooked them. It has hooked you too, though you scramble for explanations that make sense. Perhaps you tell yourself it's like a song stuck in your head, a medieval earworm. In your own century, you've known the torment of jingles repeating endlessly, of pop choruses echoing long after the music stops. But those songs only steal your attention. This one is stealing your will. It is like drowning, but in sound. Every breath you take seems filled with her voice. Every thought you form comes tinted with her melody. You try to remember where you are, to cling to the taste of salt on your lips or the sting of cold wind against your cheeks, but the details of the world blur at the edges. All that remains sharp and vibrant is the music. It is not even words, just syllables and tones, but you feel as though you understand. You hear promises you didn't know you longed for. Safety, warmth, an end to the hunger that gnaws at your stomach. A release from the endless suffering of the voyage. Her voice wraps those lies in honey and holds them just out of reach, urging you closer, always closer. The ship itself seems complicit. The timbers echo in rhythm with the tune. The waves slap against the hull like percussion. Your oarmates no longer curse and groan, but sit slack-jawed, entranced. The steersman's hands loosen on the tiller. You hear a splash and realize one of your crew has already gone overboard, arms spread wide as though to embrace an unseen lover. He does not cry out when the water swallows him. He does not thrash or beg. He simply vanishes beneath the waves, and no one moves to stop him. Why would they? They envy him. You tell yourself you will resist. You grit your teeth, dig your nails into your palms until blood beads beneath your fingernails. Anything to keep your mind grounded. But every act of resistance is drowned out by the rising swell of her song. It grows bolder, clearer, more insistent, as if amused by your struggle and determined to prove how futile it is. You know how this ends. History is littered with tales of sailors dashed against rocks, of ships splintered because men followed voices they could not ignore. You always imagined they were fools. You thought yourself wiser, immune, untouchable in your rational superiority. And now you understand. There is no wisdom that protects you from a song that worms its way into the marrow of your bones. No logic strong enough to silence a voice that promises everything you've ever craved. You might resist for a time, but not forever. Not when the sea itself carries her lullaby. Not when every heartbeat drums to her rhythm. You lean forward, eyes fixed on the horizon you cannot see, and the last rational corner of your mind whispers the truth you refuse to say aloud. You will follow her, and you will not return. The ship you are trapped on is not a romantic galleon with white sails snapping majestically in the wind. It is a medieval cog, and that means it is less a vessel of adventure and more a floating death sentence, cobbled together from timbers that were already half rotting when the carpenter first hammered them in place. The planks creak with every shift of water, seams groan as salt water seeps through, and tar meant to seal the cracks oozes in foul black streaks. Every corner smells of mildew, old fish, and the kind of human sweat that never goes away, even when mixed with seawater. You could scrub this deck for a week with sand and vinegar, and still, the stench would claw its way back, stronger than before. The ship is small enough that privacy doesn't exist. You eat, sleep, and suffer within arm's reach of a dozen other men, all of whom are equally filthy and equally miserable. Hammocks are still a far-off dream of the future, so you bed down on damp planks or on a crude pallet stuffed with straw that grows mold faster than it dries. At night, rats scamper freely over your feet, treating your ship like a playground. They gnaw through sacks of grain, bite through leather, and occasionally nibble on human toes when hunger drives them bold enough. And if you think they're the worst of your roommates, just wait until you hear the lice scratching tirelessly at your scalp or feel the fleas crawling in the seams of your clothes. Your galley is no kinder. It's not some sweeping vessel with rows of gleaming oars handled by disciplined men in neat formation. It is chaos given wood and rope. The benches where rowers sit are slick with sweat, urine, and spilled ale, the wood polished not by craftsmanship, but by years of suffering thighs rubbing against it. The oars are heavy, unwieldy monsters that smash blisters into your palms and tear muscles down your back. The salt spray burns those raw wounds, and then the sweat seeps into them, adding its own special brand of misery. You try to grip harder, row longer, but the oars own you. They always own you. Below deck is worse. There is no neat division between storage and living space. Barrels of fish and salted meat sit alongside the bedding of the crew, their brine leaking into the floorboards. The constant damp makes the wood spongy, as if the ship itself is slowly dissolving back into the ocean from which it came. The lanterns throw a dull, smoky glow, barely illuminating more than a few feet ahead, so shadows reign everywhere. That's when you notice the shifting movements of things that aren't your fellow sailors. Rats. Always rats. Their slick bodies dart between barrels. Their teeth gnaw endlessly. You sometimes wake to find them chewing directly on the hull, as though eager to speed up the day your ship will finally surrender to the sea. The soundscape is a symphony of despair. The groan of timber, the shriek of ropes stretched too thin, the endless slap of waves that never let you forget the deep weights just inches away. Above, the sails flap with a noise that's less heroic banner and more a worn rag begging to be retired. The wind doesn't carry romance. It carries damp, unrelenting chill, cutting through every layer of wool and leather you pile on. The cold never leaves. It seeps into your bones until you no longer remember what warmth felt like. Even fire, when it can be coaxed into life, gives little comfort, its smoke choking the close air and making your eyes water. And still, despite its many flaws, this ship is your only lifeline. The sea beyond it is not forgiving, not in this century. If the timbers give way, if a storm rips through the sails, if the oars snap and strand you adrift, you do not get rescued by some passing vessel of mercy. You simply vanish. You become another nameless skeleton claimed by the tide, another story to terrify boys who dream of the sea before reality rips the dream apart. You want to picture this as an adventure, a tale of discovery and glory, the kind of thing paintings later will try to dress in gold and blue. But nothing about this ship belongs in a painting. This is not Disney's ocean of cheerful crabs and mermaids with big eyes and flowing hair. This is a wet coffin held together by rope and prayer. The only songs waiting here are not cheerful ballads, but haunting voices that will drag you overboard the first chance they get. You cling to the railing, feel the slime of salt and rot slick against your hands, and you realize the truth. You are not on a vessel bound for triumph. You are on a vessel of doom, and the ocean already knows your name. The men you're stuck with are not the noble, sea-hardened heroes painted in storybooks. They're a sorry collection of unwashed humanity scraped together from villages that wanted them gone, taverns that had no more space, and prisons that decided the gallows was too merciful. Their teeth are rotted or missing entirely, giving them smiles that look more like wounds than expressions. Their hair is a mess of greasy tangles, crawling with lice that they scratch at constantly, nails tearing red lines into skin already blistered by sun and salt. Their breath reeks of sour ale and spoiled meat, and when they laugh, which they do often in bursts that sound more like growls, you can count every black stump of a molar. They spend their days either half drunk or praying they'll get drunk again soon. Ale flows constantly, though calling it ale is generous. It's thin, warm, and sour enough to make your stomach lurch, but it's safer than the ship's water, which comes alive with slimy things after a week at sea. They drink to dull the hunger, to drown the boredom, to forget the lice, the fleas, and the rats that scamper across their faces while they sleep. The result is a crew always teetering on the line between sluggish stupor and violent fury. Fights break out over scraps of food, a misheard word, even a glance that lingers too long. Knives flash, teeth sink into arms, and blood is mopped with filthy rags before the ship lurches on as if nothing happened. But beneath their drunken bluster lies something darker. Superstition, so thick it drowns reason. They see omens in everything. The way the wind shifts, the creak of the ropes, a gull screaming overhead. A dropped spoon means death is coming. An itch in the left hand means bad luck. A shadow on the sail means the devil himself has boarded. They mutter prayers to saints they barely remember, carve crude symbols into the mast, and spit over the railing to appease whatever spirits lurk in the depths. They wear charms of bone and string, kiss bits of driftwood as if they were holy relics, and whisper about curses that cling to men like barnacles. And then there's you, the outsider, the unlucky one. You don't belong, and they know it. They've decided the storms are your fault, the spoiled meat is your fault, the cracked mast is your fault. Every misfortune on this cursed voyage points back to you like a compass needle finding north. They mutter it when they think you can't hear, spit the word under their breath, eyes darting with suspicion. You're the stranger, the landborn, the omen. Some already refuse to sit near you, claiming the fleas you carry are different from theirs. Others joke, with voices not entirely joking, that tossing you overboard might appease the sea. The laughter that follows is loud, but it doesn't hide the hunger in their eyes. At night, when the ship is cloaked in darkness and the stars glimmer like cold sparks above, you hear their whispers, tales of voices in the water, of women with hair like seaweed and mouths filled with teeth sharper than knives. They've all heard the songs, they claim, or know someone who has, and every story ends the same, with men pulled screaming into the waves, never seen again. They make the sign of the cross, then spit to cover their bases, then take another drink, muttering about how the next dawn might be their last. And every time the sea goes quiet, their faces harden, their hands twitch toward knives or charms, as if expecting the voices to begin at any moment. You sit among them, itching, reeking, hungry, and terrified. You watch their eyes flick to you whenever the ship groans too loudly, whenever the waves hit too hard, whenever the wind stutters and dies. You don't need them to say it outright. You can feel it in the way they lean away, in the way their laughter cuts sharp when you pass, in the way silence grows heavy when your shadow falls across them. They've already decided what you are, and you realize, with a cold weight in your stomach, that you are trapped not only on a vessel doomed by the sea, but among a crew who believes your death might be the only thing that saves them. Your days at sea blur together into one long punishment, a cycle of hunger, sickness, and exhaustion that makes you wonder how anyone ever survived a single voyage. Meals, if you can call them that, come in the form of salted fish, so tough you have to gnaw at it like an old bone, bread that sprouts mold faster than you can scrape it off, and a water supply that goes rancid within a week. You drink it anyway, gagging at the taste of rotten wood and algae because thirst will kill you faster than disgust. Sometimes, as a special treat, the crew is given a thin gruel made from grain that's more weevil than flour, and you can hear the crunch of insects between your teeth as you choke it down. Hunger turns your stomach into a hollow drum, and yet every mouthful still feels like swallowing sickness. Seasickness never gives you reprieve. The constant rocking of the ship, the endless churn of waves beneath you, keeps your insides in rebellion. Your body grows weak from vomiting until there's nothing left to bring up but bile, and still the nausea claws at your gut. The smell of brine mixes with sweat and rot until breathing itself feels like swallowing poison. Even those hardened to the sea never look well. Their eyes are sunken, their skin sallow, their lips cracked and raw. Everyone reeks of vomit, and the sour stench clings to the planks, seeping into the air as if the ship itself has grown seasick. When you aren't rowing or hauling ropes until your hands bleed, you're trying to sleep. The hammock you imagined rocking gently with the waves doesn't exist here. Instead, you squeeze into cramped quarters, shoulder to shoulder with bodies as filthy and restless as yours, and lie down on damp boards or a sack stuffed with straw that's crawling with fleas. They bite in the dark, leaving your skin a patchwork of welts, and scratching brings no relief. Only torn flesh and blood for the rats to lick. Rest never comes easy. Every creak of the ship wakes you. Every drip of seawater on your face keeps you on edge. Every shift of a body nearby reminds you of the lice that leap from sailor to sailor. When you do manage to drift off, the nightmares are as cruel as waking life. Visions of drowning, of being dragged into the black water, of teeth and song and silence. The air never feels clean. Smoke from the cooking fire fills the lower deck, stinging your eyes and leaving your throat raw, while the upper deck offers only cold wind that slices through every layer of clothing. You're always either too hot or too cold, drenched in sweat 1 hour and shivering the next, with no way to dry your clothes when they soak through. Salt stiffens every fabric, turning your shirt into sandpaper and your cloak into a crusted shell. Blisters bloom across your feet, then split open, and every step becomes agony. Infection lurks in every cut, festering slowly while you pretend not to notice. The monotony is its own kind of torture. Days stretch into endless gray horizons, sky and water melting into each other until you forget what solid ground looks like. The only constants are the stink of men, the slap of waves, and the gnawing thought that you may never see home again. Voices rise and fall in drunken songs, arguments explode over nothing, and always, underneath it all, the fear hums like a low note that never fades. No one speaks it aloud, but everyone knows the sea is hunting them. You were already breaking before you ever heard the first note of the siren's song. Your body is weak from hunger, your mind dulled by exhaustion, your spirit worn down by misery. Every sense is raw, every nerve strung taut, every shred of comfort stripped away long ago. By the time the real nightmare arrives, you are already half a corpse stumbling through a living hell. Which means when the song finally reaches you, you never stood a chance. The first time you hear it, the sound doesn't even register as danger. It drifts across the waves like mist, soft and delicate, threading through the salt air and the groan of wood until you barely know it's there. Your ears strain for it without your consent, as though some hidden instinct has already chosen for you. The melody is not loud, not booming, not even insistent. It is simply there, inescapable, winding into every crack of your skull, like water finding the weakest point in stone. And before you realize it, you've stopped breathing just to listen. Your crew doesn't call it melody or harmony. They call it magic, witchcraft, the devil's own whisper. Their eyes go wide, lips moving silently as if in prayer, while their bodies lean toward the sound against every shred of self-preservation they possess. To them, this is sorcery, proof of demons in the deep, a curse flung from creatures that were never meant to be gazed upon by mortal eyes. They fear it, even as they crave it. They believe the voice will strip their souls from their bodies and carry them down into hell, and yet not one of them turns away. You, with centuries of knowledge in your pocket, know better. This isn't witchcraft. This is brain chemistry. The Siren's song is an ambush in sound waves, a hijacking of dopamine pathways older than civilization itself. It slides into your mind and plays the same cruel trick as every modern obsession. A song you can't get out of your head, a melody that loops endlessly no matter how you try to silence it. The difference is that when the radio gets stuck in your brain, you lose a night's sleep. When the siren does it, you lose everything. The notes fire straight into your pleasure centers, flooding you with longing, tricking your body into believing this is the one thing it has always wanted. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your skin prickles as though the very air has become electric. You feel it the way an addict feels the pull of a needle, the way a gambler feels the lure of one more hand, the way someone scrolling through endless feeds feels unable to stop. It's the ultimate compulsion, the oldest manipulation, so finely tuned that no human defense stands a chance. Your brain, so sure of its strength, folds in an instant. And once it hooks you, the rest is simple. Your vision narrows, the edges of the world blur, and you can barely hear the shouts of your shipmates over the sound of that impossible voice. Reason slips away like sand through your fingers. Every thought that told you to stay back, to survive, to cling to the safety of the deck, evaporates under the weight of that music. Your feet move before you think, carrying you closer to the rail, closer to the edge, closer to the place where the sea waits open-mouthed. You don't question it. You don't resist. You want. Medieval minds, unarmed by science, clung to the word enchantment. To them, this was proof that otherworldly forces had clawed their way into men's bodies, and in a way, they were right. What they called magic was the truth of biology laid bare. Chemical puppetry, neurons singing along with the melody until will itself collapsed. Their words may have been wrapped in fear and superstition, but the terror underneath was the same one you feel now. Because whether you call it sorcery or neurohacking, the result is identical. You are no longer yourself. You are no longer in command. You are a body wired to obey, a mind drowning in desire that is not yours, a marionette dragged toward the waves by strings of sound. And as the song grows louder, weaving tighter around your skull, you understand the cruelest truth of all. You are not walking to your death because you want to. You are walking to your death because you no longer have the capacity to want anything else. The song doesn't stop at your ears. It seeps into your eyes, your skin, the very marrow of your bones, until reality itself begins to buckle under its weight. At first, it's subtle. The gray horizon softens. The endless churn of waves seems gentler, The sky seems to open in a way you swear it hadn't a moment before. You blink and rub your eyes, blaming exhaustion, hunger, or the constant sway of the ship. But deep down, you know this isn't normal fatigue. Something is rewriting the world around you, and you don't have the strength to argue with it. Your shipmates are struck dumb, faces slack and dreamy as they lean over the rail. Their eyes glisten in a way that makes them look like children, seeing a festival for the first time. They murmur about golden sands, about green meadows and fruit trees heavy with gifts, about women waiting on the shore with open arms. They speak as though they're already there, already walking barefoot on grass instead of splintering planks slick with brine. You glance where they're pointing, and for a moment, God help you, you see it too. The coastline ahead isn't the sharp, barren ridge you know it must be. Instead, it shimmers, bathed in light that looks too warm to be real. You see beaches gleaming with soft white sand, glistening like powdered sugar under a benevolent sun. You see fountains of fresh water sparkling in the air, flowing clear and cool, and you can almost taste it on your tongue, crisp and sweet compared to the rot of the ship's barrel. Palms sway in a breeze that smells of honey, not salt. Even the air feels different, sweeter, fuller, as though every breath could finally fill your lungs and purge the sickness from your body. And then there are the figures. They stand on the shore like saints descended from heaven, their bodies radiant, their arms outstretched in welcome. Their smiles are soft, their lips parting in perfect harmony with the song you already can't resist. They promise rest, love, freedom from the endless grind of ropes and salt and hunger. They promise you will never be cold again, never be thirsty again, never ache from blisters and sores and vermin gnawing at your flesh. They look like salvation, and every muscle in your body strains toward them. But reality is still there, cruel and jagged beneath the veil. The truth waits just behind the illusion, sharp as teeth. What you think are golden beaches are knife-blade rocks jutting up from the surf, ready to gut the hull and splinter the ship into kindling. What you think is fresh water is salt spray slamming against stone, foaming white in the crash of waves. The palms are broken masts, washed ashore from other ships that met their end here. And the radiant figures? They are shadows, half glimpsed between sprays of water and shards of foam, shapes too thin and too twisted to be human. Their arms are not open in embrace. They are talons stretching wide. You know, somewhere in the shrinking corner of your rational mind, that this is a trap. You know the song is bending your senses, draping a theater curtain of paradise over a stage of bones and wreckage. But knowing doesn't help you. Knowledge is powerless against compulsion. Your eyes continue to see what the melody demands. Your body continues to move toward it. Truth and lie blur into one, until you can no longer tell whether the rocks are rocks or whether they're simply another disguise. The ship creaks and groans as it tilts, pulled by the collective leaning of bodies desperate to hurl themselves into the sea. Your heart hammers because you understand what's happening, but the understanding doesn't slow you. If anything, it quickens your pace. Logic whispers warnings in your ear, but the music screams louder, and the paradise before you shines brighter. You tell yourself you'll leap only when you're close enough to safety, but that's the cruelest illusion of all. Because by the time you hit the water, there will be no safety. Only jagged stone, only foam boiling red, only the arms of something waiting, smiling, and singing still. The closer you drift toward the source of the song, the more unbearable it becomes. At first, it was a distant thread, something woven lightly into the wind. Now, it's everywhere, thick in the air like smoke, wrapping around your body, filling your skull until you can't remember silence at all. Every note is clearer, sharper, richer, as though the distance itself was muffling a truth you were never meant to hear. And that truth is this: the voice is not simply beautiful, it is overwhelming. It consumes, It presses against your mind until it feels swollen, ready to burst. Your shipmates are unraveling faster than the planks beneath their feet. Men who spent years together at sea, who shared sickness, hunger, storms, and scars, now glare at each other like snarling animals. One lunges forward and tries to climb the rail, only to be dragged back by another who screams that he heard the voice first, that the paradise waiting is his to claim. A third man hurls himself into the struggle, clawing and cursing, spitting blood as his teeth crack against another's skull. Their eyes are not human anymore. They shine with fever, with need so intense it has stripped them of everything else. The fighting spreads like rot. Two sailors crash into a pile of coils, rolling and smashing each other's heads against the wood. Another swings a rusted knife, its edge barely sharp enough to cut rope, but still enough to draw a ragged line of blood across another man's arm. Shouts turn into growls, growls into screams, and screams into the wet crunch of bodies breaking under fists and boots. The ship is no longer a vessel carrying men across water. It is a cage, and the animals inside are tearing themselves apart to escape. And all the while, the song keeps building. Its sweetness no longer feels gentle. It is demanding now, urgent, a command instead of an invitation. Every fiber of your body is pulled toward the sound, and every second you don't move feels like suffocating. You grip the rail to steady yourself, your nails biting into the damp wood, but your legs twitch to climb. The salt spray on your lips tastes like honey. The wind in your ears is full of laughter. Somewhere in the haze, you almost believe you hear your own name being called, drawn out long and tender, in a voice that promises you've never been more wanted. You want to go. God help you, you want to. Men are leaping now, flinging themselves from the deck with no thought of the jagged rocks that lurk beneath the froth. They hit the water with sharp cracks and splashes, their cries cut short as the sea swallows them. Some thrash toward the shore, arms pumping desperately, convinced they're swimming toward safety. Others sink almost immediately, pulled under by weight and wounds, their faces vanishing in seconds. But it doesn't matter to the ones still on deck. Each splash only makes the frenzy worse. If one man has a chance to reach the dream on the shore, then another must try too. The captain bellows orders, his voice ragged and raw, but it doesn't matter. Authority has no place here. Faith, reason, discipline. These are all flimsy things, paper shields against a flood. His commands are drowned out by the song, shredded by the roar of waves, ignored by men who would rather fight their brothers than hear another second without answering the call. You see him push one man back from the edge, only to be shoved aside by three more who nearly drag him with them as they tumble screaming into the sea. And then you realize the most terrifying part. The closer you get to the shore, the less it feels like choice at all. At a distance, you might have resisted, might have argued with yourself, clung to reason like a piece of driftwood. But here, within reach of the source, there is no argument left. Your body has already decided. Your muscles are ready. Your lungs are preparing. Your mind is narrowing to a single point of desire. The song has filled every hollow in you, and there is no room for anything else. The fighting continues, brutal and unrelenting, but it is no longer about survival. It is about who gets to leap first. And as you watch, shaking, breathless, you know that soon enough it will be you. Because the song doesn't care how many fight, or how many die, or how many stones split skulls open beneath the waves. It only cares that you come closer, and closer still, until there is nothing left of you at all. You've grown up with the image of a mermaid splashed across every children's book and cartoon, long hair flowing like seaweed in shampoo commercials, seashells covering the essentials, and a smile that suggests she might braid your hair rather than slit your throat. That is marketing. That is centuries of myth polishing, smoothing down the jagged edges of horror into something you could slap on a lunchbox. The original Sirens were nothing like this. If you stumbled upon a medieval illustration of them, you wouldn't be humming Disney songs. You'd be locking your doors and vowing never to step on a boat again. The siren that haunted the minds of medieval sailors wasn't a sleek underwater beauty. She was an awkward nightmare hybrid, part woman, part bird. Imagine a crow with breasts, talons sprouting from human thighs, wings that beat like sails but carried a face eerily familiar. Familiar enough to fool you, human enough to seduce you, animal enough to kill you. These weren't delicate things of silver scales and doe eyes. They were scavengers, predators, creatures closer to vultures circling a battlefield than whimsical girlfriends of the sea. And their song? That wasn't meant to entertain children in a bathtub. It was a death warrant disguised as music. But over time, the narrative softened. As medieval bestiaries became Renaissance poems, and Renaissance poems became Victorian stories, the feathers molted and the tails grew. Slowly, the sharp talons vanished into the surf and were replaced with shimmering fins. The once grotesque bird woman shape was rebranded into a sleek fish woman, easier to paint, easier to carve into figureheads, easier to eroticize in the flicker of a sailor's lantern on a long, lonely night. And just like that, the siren became the mermaid. Less a scavenger, more an impossible fantasy with a deadly catch. It's a marketing problem, really. How do you make people swallow a horror story? You dress it up. You trim the beak into lips. You replace claws with delicate hands that stroke your cheek instead of ripping it off. The medieval mind wasn't fooled, of course. They knew these things weren't girlfriends of the ocean. They were warnings. Images of sirens carved into manuscripts and painted onto church walls weren't meant to make you dream of romance. They were moral billboards, reminding you that lust and temptation lead directly to death. Each feathered monster was an illustrated sermon. Desire will pull you into the rocks, and you will die gasping in the foam. Still, the crossover was inevitable. The Greeks had sirens with feathers. The Norse had selkies and sea maidens. The Irish sang of women under the waves. Myths breed with other myths, and eventually everything sloshed together into one archetype. Siren became mermaid, mermaid became siren, and people stopped remembering that once upon a time, you weren't choosing between Ariel and Ursula. You were facing something that wanted your corpse dashed open on stone, your bones to bleach on the shore. Whether feathered or finned, the outcome was the same. The funny thing is that both versions work because both exploit the same weakness, your brain. The bird woman is terrifying but magnetic, a wrongness you can't look away from, a creature that sings with a human voice while raking the air with wings. The mermaid is alluring in the opposite way, perfect symmetry that doesn't exist in the real world, an impossible beauty that tells you to ignore every red flag. The packaging changed, but the product stayed the same. You still want what you shouldn't, and wanting it will kill you. If you think sailors were any better at resisting than you would be, think again. The man on a 15th century galley who swore he saw a pale woman combing her hair on a rock wasn't imagining Disney. He was imagining salvation, comfort, love. All things he knew he'd never get on his floating prison of tar and mold. And if what crawled toward him in the dark was feathered, with eyes like a crow and teeth sharp enough to pierce skin, well, his brain would have blurred those details into something tolerable, because it had to, because otherwise the madness of longing and fear would have split him apart before the rocks ever could. That's the genius of the myth. Whether bird or fish, whether feathered talons or glittering tail, the siren's song plays on the same frequency of desperation. A lonely sailor in the 14th century and a child in the 20th century watching cartoons are reacting to the same core. The impossible promise of a voice that says, "Come closer. You're safe. You're wanted." One is heading for a watery grave, the other for a happy ending, but both are being sold the same dream in different wrapping. So don't be fooled by the marketing campaign. The medieval siren was not singing for your love. She was singing for your ruin. Whether she looked like a crow with breasts or a mermaid with perfect hair doesn't matter. The ocean always collects its due, and the song always ends the same way, with silence, rocks, and bones whitening in the sun. If you lived in the Middle Ages, you didn't need a sailor to tell you that sirens were dangerous. The church would handle that for you. Step inside a cathedral and glance up at the carved stone capitals of the columns. You might see bird-bodied women clutching harps, their beaks curled into mock smiles. Crack open a bestiary, and you'd find drawings of creatures that looked half woman, half vulture, perched on rocks with human skulls scattered beneath them. From the pulpit, priests painted them in even harsher tones. Not curious sea creatures, not tragic figures of folklore, but demonic agents dispatched by hell itself. To desire them was to invite eternal ruin. The logic was simple. Lust was already a mortal sin, one of the big seven. Add drowning to the equation, and you had what priests loved most, a cautionary tale that could scare people into obedience. It wasn't just your body that would be dashed on the rocks if you followed the siren's song. Your soul would be dashed as well, cast into hellfire to suffer for eternity. The medieval mind didn't separate natural danger from spiritual consequence. Shipwrecks weren't just accidents of tide and weather. They were divine punishment, proof of God's anger. And what better scapegoat than a winged temptress singing you straight into damnation? Imagine the sermons. A priest in a small coastal parish staring down at a congregation of fishermen's wives and weathered sailors, raising his hand to thunder about the dangers of women who weren't women at all but servants of Satan. He would describe them with relish. Long hair, sweet voices, soft faces that could turn a holy man's resolve to ash. But linger too long on their beauty, he warned, and you'd end not only at the bottom of the sea but also in the eternal depths of hell. For sailors, it wasn't just about surviving storms or sharpening swords. Every voyage became a spiritual gamble, every temptation a doorway to the inferno. The church used sirens the way it used devils, dragons, and witches as living symbols of sin. If you saw a siren in a manuscript, she wasn't there to decorate the margins. She was a moral lesson. She reminded you that desire could turn fatal in an instant, that even music could be a trap, that beauty itself could be weaponized against you. It wasn't enough to fear storms or pirates. You had to fear your own weakness, your own hunger, your own traitorous heart. To medieval preachers, the ocean was already chaotic and hostile, a realm of mystery beyond the safety of God's order. Populate that wilderness with demonic songbirds, and you had the perfect cocktail of terror. What's chilling is how effective it was. Sailors weren't only afraid of shipwrecks because of broken masts or jagged reefs. They were afraid of what those disasters meant for their souls. A storm that dashed them against the coast might be explained away as God's will, but lured by a siren's song, that was a double crime. You had courted lust and abandoned reason. You hadn't just lost your life, you'd lost eternity. Picture the guilt pressing on a man who heard something sweet on the wind. Even if it was only the call of a gull or the echo of another ship's crew, his first thought might be terror. Was that a siren? Was I already halfway to sin just by listening? And of course, the warnings served the church's purposes. Keep sailors fearful of temptation, and you keep them confessing, tithing, repenting, desperate for absolution before they even left port. Fear was a net, cast wider than any fisherman's, pulling men back into the fold. Women, too, were folded into the lesson. Be pious, be modest. Don't resemble the temptresses that drag men to ruin. A carved siren on a church wall wasn't decoration. It was a sermon in stone. Every feather, every talon, every open mouth was a warning to stay in line. The irony is that the men who railed most against the sirens were the same ones who filled their sermons with sensual detail describing the curve of a siren's body or the sweetness of her voice in ways that made the danger sound dangerously appealing. But that was part of the strategy. To frighten, you first had to entice. Then you crushed the fantasy under the weight of eternal punishment. Heaven or hell, salvation or damnation, shore or rocks. The choice was always framed as binary and always stacked against human weakness. So when you stepped onto that medieval ship, you carried more than rope and salt pork with you. You carried centuries of warnings carved into stone, inked into manuscripts, and shouted from pulpits. Every creak of the wood, every flicker of moonlight on the waves, carried the echo of a sermon you couldn't forget. You weren't just afraid of dying. You were afraid of what your death meant. The ocean was merciless, but the afterlife was worse. And when the song began, drifting across the water soft and sweet, you knew exactly what it was. Not music, not beauty, not chance. It was a trap laid by hell. And your soul was already leaning over the edge. Crack open a medieval manuscript, and you'll find a strange, unsettling world staring back at you. At first glance, the pages might seem filled with whimsy. Knights battling snails, rabbits jousting with lances, monks chasing geese across the margins. But turn a few more folios, and the mood changes. Suddenly, perched on the edge of the text, you'll find a siren. Sometimes she's half bird, with wings spread and talons curling like hooks. Sometimes she's half fish, her lower body dissolving into scales that shimmer even in ink. Always, she's dangerous, a figure caught between allure and monstrosity. The scribes didn't just draw her to entertain themselves. They drew her to terrify. Bestiaries, those medieval catalogues of animals real and imagined, gave sirens a permanent place among lions, bears, unicorns, and dragons. Each entry wasn't just zoology. It was morality in disguise. When a scribe wrote about lions, he wasn't really interested in fur and teeth. He was explaining bravery and kingship. When he drew a siren, he was illustrating sin, lust, and the peril of weak-willed men. The art showed a creature with a woman's face and chest, sometimes even holding a comb or mirror to underline vanity, but below that came feathers, talons, or scales. This wasn't beauty. It was bait. The warning couldn't be clearer. Delight in the surface, and you'll pay for it with your life. Yet in the margins, things grew stranger. Illuminators seemed to enjoy pushing sirens into grotesque absurdity. You'd see them with faces, more bird than woman, their beaks stretched wide as if in mid-screech, eyes rolling with manic energy. Some were drawn locked in combat with men who wielded swords or spears, as though the battle against temptation was physical as well as spiritual. Others were more unsettling. Images of sailors reaching towards sirens, their hands stretching desperately across the page, only to find themselves entangled in claws or dragged beneath stylized waves. To the medieval reader, this wasn't fantasy. It was a genuine threat, lurking out at sea. Still, the medieval imagination couldn't resist a little gallows humor. In the margins of some manuscripts, you'll find sirens next to grotesques, those bizarre hybrid creatures with human faces and animal bodies, usually inserted to poke fun at the seriousness of the main text. A siren might appear next to a fool in a jester's hood, or opposite a cat clutching a mouse like a trophy. The effect was unsettlingly comic, as though the scribes themselves knew how absurd fear could look when put on parchment. But that didn't blunt the edge of the terror. Laughter and dread weren't separate in the medieval imagination. They were tangled together. A joke about a siren didn't erase her danger. It amplified it. The artistry itself was another layer of unease. Medieval inkwork had a way of exaggerating the unnatural, leaning into distorted proportions that made creatures look uncanny. A siren's eyes would be too wide, her mouth too sharp, her talons exaggerated into barbed hooks. Her body didn't flow smoothly from woman to beast. It was patched together like a nightmare. To see one on the page was to feel the uncanny valley tugging at your brain, centuries before that term was ever coined. And when these images appeared in texts meant to teach you about the world, they weren't just pictures, they were gospel truth. Imagine being a young monk, copying line after line of Latin text by candlelight, glancing up to see a siren staring back at you from the margin. You wouldn't have thought of her as fantasy. You'd have believed she existed, waiting out on some remote shoreline. The scribes and artists weren't playing with fairy tales. They were recording the shape of terror itself. To them, the ocean was vast, uncharted, and filled with horrors. The siren was just one of many lurking threats, but she was one that reached beyond claws and teeth. She attacked your soul through your ears. That made her worse than dragons. And the more these images spread, the more real the fear became. Each manuscript copied, each bestiary illustrated, reinforced the nightmare. A sailor might never see a siren with his own eyes, but he didn't need to. He'd already seen her in the margins of a psalter or the painted pages of a prayer book, where her song was depicted not as notes, but as snares. He carried those images with him when he set out to sea, and when the wind shifted and the waves hissed against the hull, he could almost hear her singing. So, the bestiaries weren't just books. They were incubators of dread, cataloging every horror a medieval mind could imagine and dressing it up in scripture and ink. They blurred the line between instruction and nightmare, between moral allegory and genuine terror. The siren was both joke and judgment, entertainment and executioner, cartoon and curse. And as you stare at those pages now, centuries later, you can still feel the unease they intended to spark. The creature may be frozen in parchment, but the terror she represents is anything but still. Because even drawn in ink, the siren still sings. The ocean was never kind to wooden ships, and in the medieval world, it was merciless. Without charts worth trusting, without sonar or lighthouses, you were sailing half-blind into a graveyard of hidden reefs and jagged cliffs. Sailors knew the coastlines could kill you just as easily as storms, but when the siren's voice drifted across the water, it wasn't caution that filled the air. It was longing. It was hunger. It was the irrational certainty that safety and salvation waited just beyond the horizon. And that's when the sea struck hardest. Picture the shoreline not as a soft beach but as a wall of death. The cliffs rose black and sheer, carved by centuries of waves battering the rock, and beneath them lay shelves of razor-sharp stone hidden just under the surface. You wouldn't see them until your ship's hull shuddered like a cracking bone. The waves didn't care how careful you were either. They surged and twisted, pulling your vessel toward the rocks with the strength of 100 men. All it took was one misstep, one bad gust, and your ship became driftwood. The sirens didn't even have to touch you. Their power wasn't in claws or teeth. It was in convincing you that the cliffs weren't cliffs at all. The sailors didn't see jagged stone. Under the spell, they saw marble palaces gleaming in the sun, safe harbors with calm waters, lush groves swaying just beyond the surf. They heard laughter, feasts, the promise of warm fires. The geography didn't change. Their perception did. And that was enough to kill them. Think about how your brain handles modern illusions. You've seen pictures where lines appear bent when they aren't, or where colors trick your eyes into seeing shades that don't exist. That's harmless fun in a psychology textbook. Now imagine that same hijacking of your senses while you're steering a 70-foot vessel through storm-thrashed waters. The siren's song wasn't just a sound. It was a neurological override, convincing you to turn the rudder directly into the rocks. Your destruction was voluntary, and you didn't even know it. The geography around siren-haunted waters was perfectly chosen. They were said to dwell on rocky islands, places where the coastline jutted like teeth into the sea. The waves there weren't gentle. They exploded against stone in sprays that towered over the decks of ships. To hear their voices was to be lured toward the most treacherous real estate the ocean could offer. Even if you managed to resist for a moment, the current would betray you. It dragged ships inward, spinning them helplessly until the hulls splintered. And when the vessel finally cracked apart, the water itself became a weapon. Splinters of wood, loose cargo, and drowning men churned together in a nightmare blender of foam and bone. For the crew, death didn't come quickly. When the hull tore open, seawater rushed in, sweeping men off their feet and pinning them under collapsed beams. The lucky ones drowned before the rocks could tear them apart. The unlucky ones were hurled against the cliffs, their bodies broken like discarded shells. Some clung to wreckage, hoping to drift away, but the waves always pulled them back. The geography of Siren shores wasn't designed for escape. It was designed for wreckage. You might imagine there'd be survivors, someone clever enough to plug their ears or lash themselves to the mast until the song passed. But the geography made that fantasy laughable. Even if you couldn't hear the siren's voice, the sea itself forced you toward ruin. The wind funneled against the cliffs, the current dragged your vessel inward, and the rocks cut off any chance of maneuver. Sailors didn't just fear the song, they feared the land that came with it. You could survive tempests, pirates, even starvation, but no one survived the rocks. This was why the sirens were more feared than sea serpents or krakens. A serpent might crush your ship, but it was at least visible. A kraken might drag you under, but that was brute force. The sirens combined deception with geography, tricking you into steering yourself into the one place a ship could never endure. It wasn't a monster's maw that devoured you. It was stone, unyielding and ancient, waiting patiently for centuries to claim another vessel. In the end, that's what made their lairs so terrifying. It wasn't just that the sirens could sing, it was that the world itself collaborated with them. The cliffs, the reefs, the waves, they all worked as accomplices. And when your ship finally splintered into kindling and your crew vanished beneath the foam, the sirens didn't have to lift a finger. The rocks had done their work. When the ship finally groaned itself apart, it wasn't a clean snap like a movie explosion. It was slow, grinding, a sound that vibrated through your bones as the timbers bent and cracked, each splinter like a scream in the night. Water surged into the hull, flooding the hold with a force so brutal it tore loose barrels and smashed them against the men scrambling in the dark. You thought the ship had been bad before, wet, crowded, miserable. But a sinking medieval ship was a carnival of misery where every ride ended in the same place, the bottom of the sea. There were no lifeboats waiting for you, no neat lines of passengers ushered into safety. That concept didn't exist. If a cog or galley went down, so did everyone aboard. A few sailors might clutch planks or barrels in the chaos, but most never had the chance. The deck tilted, ropes whipped loose, masts cracked and fell like executioners' blades. If you weren't killed by wood and rigging, you were swept screaming into the black water. And the moment you hit it, the sea did what the sirens couldn't. It stripped the air from your lungs. The first thing you noticed was the cold. The water didn't just chill your skin. It punched into your body, driving the warmth from your blood until your muscles stiffened and your chest locked tight. Hypothermia was a slow killer, but in the medieval sea it didn't need hours. Minutes were enough. You could flail and kick, but your body was betraying you, turning to stone in the embrace of the water. Each gasp dragged in more salt, burning your throat, and soon the struggle felt less like swimming and more like being dragged downward by invisible hands. Around you, the wreck became a carnival of thrashing men and shattered timber. Sailors clawed at each other in blind panic, fighting over the same floating plank as if it could carry them both. Others screamed prayers to saints no one could hear, their voices swallowed by the surf. You could see the whites of their eyes, wide and animal, each face a reflection of your own fear. In that moment, The hierarchy of the ship, captains, mates, common hands, meant nothing. Every man was equal now, stripped to the same drowning fate. The ocean wasn't satisfied with just drowning you. It had more tricks. The Siren's lair was often far from shore, which meant even if you managed to cling to debris, rescue wasn't coming. The Coast Guard didn't exist. No patrol ship was scanning for wreckage. You were alone in a black expanse that stretched forever. And as the minutes dragged into eternity, another predator arrived. The sea was full of them. The splash of a body hitting the water carried for miles, and blood from smashed skulls and broken limbs was a beacon. Before long, fins cut the surface, circling with patience that chilled the marrow. Sharks didn't care about your prayers. They weren't part of your myths or your sins. They were just mouths, teeth arranged in rows like nature's saw blades, and the wreck provided them a feast. The first strike was always sudden, a spray of water and a scream that ended too quickly. Then came the frenzy, the water around you churning red as bodies were dragged under and torn apart. Some men begged to be pulled onto the wreckage, but no one reached for them. Survival made cowards of everyone. And yet, even as all of this happened, you could still hear it. The song. It didn't fade with the wreck. It wasn't muffled by the water filling your ears. It slid beneath the chaos like a melody played over screams. And even as men died, part of you still wanted to follow it. That was the cruelest part. Not the drowning, not the sharks, but the longing that dragged you deeper, convincing you even as the salt burned your lungs that the voice was leading you somewhere safe. You might imagine that clinging to a floating beam could save you until dawn, but the medieval sea didn't care about optimism. The waves rolled endlessly, salt stinging your eyes, your arms trembling until your grip slipped. The cold was merciless, dragging you down into numb silence. And for those who somehow resisted, there was no miracle ship to pluck them from the waves. By sunrise, only debris remained, and the sirens sang on, waiting for the next vessel to stumble close. Shipwreck wasn't a possibility in these waters. It was the guarantee. And when it came, it was no heroic tragedy. It was a carnival of panic and blood, where wood cracked, men screamed, the sea swallowed, and predators feasted. The sirens didn't need to kill you with claws or teeth. The ocean was their accomplice, and it never left survivors. If you think jumping overboard is a brave, cinematic choice, the desperate plunge of a man choosing the sea over the siren, you've been lied to by every storybook and film. The water doesn't welcome you. It swallows you like a stone. The shock hits first, a brutal, numbing cold that clamps down on your chest, stealing breath before you even have the chance to scream. It feels like you've leapt not into waves, but into ice, and the chill races along your veins until every limb turns stiff and heavy. Your heart hammers, frantic, but your lungs forget how to work. The sea has no patience for hesitation. Your clothes are wool, rough and heavy, the kind that never dries and carries the stink of sweat, smoke, and salt. The moment they're soaked, they double in weight, dragging you down with relentless force. Boots fill instantly, pulling your legs like anchors, and your thrashing only makes it worse. The more you kick, the deeper you sink. The salt water floods your mouth, stinging your throat, making you choke and cough until you swallow more than you spit out. The ocean doesn't fight you. It simply waits for your panic to finish the job. Above you, the ship recedes into shadow, its hull looming like the wall of a fortress you'll never scale again. You think you can swim toward it, maybe catch hold of a dangling rope or a plank, but every stroke is agony, your body shuddering in the cold, your arms screaming from the effort. It's not swimming. It's clawing at water that slips through your fingers, refusing to hold you up. Even if you were the strongest rower on deck, the medieval sea doesn't care. It can outlast you, outchill you, outpull you into its depths. The song is still there. That's the cruelest part. Even with waves closing over your head, even with your ears burning and bubbles rushing past your face, the melody threads through, muffled and warped, but unmistakable. You should be terrified, fighting to live. Instead, some part of you leans into it, convinced the voice is down there, waiting. The warmth of the sound feels like a promise, and in the half-second before your lungs finally betray you, you almost believe there's something beautiful below. But beauty isn't what greets you. It's the burn in your chest when your body forces you to inhale, even though the only thing waiting is salt water. It scalds your throat, fills your lungs like molten lead, and you convulse, hacking under the surface as if you could spit the ocean out. Instinct tells you to kick upward, but your clothes are weights, your body is failing, and the cold is turning thought into fog. Soon, there is no up or down, just the crushing press of water in every direction. The thrashing slows, the panic dims. A strange calm creeps in, and it feels for a moment like drifting instead of drowning. Your body grows heavy, too tired to resist, and the cold starts to feel almost warm. That's the lie hypothermia tells before it closes the door for good. The song pulses faintly in your skull, more lullaby than trap now, coaxing you toward surrender. The air you begged for is gone, replaced by a silence that seeps into your bones. Above, if anyone still watches, they'll see the water close smooth as glass, swallowing the last trace of you. Maybe they'll see a ripple, a hand breaking the surface before slipping under again, but soon even that vanishes. The sea doesn't leave evidence. It doesn't carry you back to shore to be mourned. It keeps you, bones and all, hidden in its black stomach. To the men still clinging to the wreck, you're already forgotten. Just another sailor claimed by bad luck and worse judgment. And yet the song continues. It doesn't need you. It will wait for the next fool, the next desperate leap into freezing waves. The sirens don't care how you die, whether on the rocks, torn by sharks, or choking on brine. They care only that you heard them and followed. And if you jumped overboard, you gave them exactly what they wanted. The sea doesn't let you go. It never does. From far away, she is everything your starving imagination aches for. A shimmer on the horizon, a figure half hidden by foam and sunlight, her silhouette soft as a promise. The sound of her voice paints her skin as flawless, her eyes as warm, her smile as salvation. She doesn't even have to be clear. Your mind does the rest, filling in the gaps with whatever dream you've been clutching to survive these endless, rotting days at sea. She is every tavern song and whispered fantasy made flesh, a goddess rising from salt and spray, beckoning you closer with nothing but a note held longer than breath should allow. From a distance, she is paradise. But distance is a liar. The nearer you come, the harder it is to pretend she's human. What looked like smooth, sun-kissed skin glitters with a sheen too sharp, too rigid. Scales, not softness, ripple down her arms, catching the light like knives. Her fingers are not delicate, but elongated, ending in claws yellowed and curved from years of raking across wood, stone, and bone. She moves with grace, but it's not the grace of a woman. It's the alien efficiency of a predator who has never once needed to chase prey that came willingly. The music carries you forward, even as your stomach knots, and some primal part of your brain screams that you are walking into a trap older than language itself. Up close, her face does not belong to the dream you first believed. Her eyes are wide, too wide, black as wet ink with no glint of warmth. They stare with the fixed hunger of something that sees you not as a man but as meat already claimed. Her mouth, when it opens, is not the gentle curve of a maiden about to whisper love. It is a cavern of teeth, jagged and needle-thin, layered like a shark's. Even when she smiles, it's wrong, too full, stretching too far, the kind of grin that makes your heart freeze even as your legs keep moving. You know it's wrong. You know it's death. but the song laces through your brainstem, snapping reason like thread. Her beauty is a mirage, fading the moment you breach the line between fantasy and reality. The hair that looked golden from afar hangs stringy and damp, matted with seaweed, the stench of brine and decay curling from it in nauseating waves. Her skin is not luminous, but pocked, pale, tinged green, where scales meet flesh. When she moves, her body bends at angles not meant for human joints, and her voice only grows sweeter, drowning out the crack of your fear. The song is a drug, and she is the dealer, offering the high even as she readies the blade. You'd expect mercy in the eyes of something so worshipped in myth. There is none. You'd expect softness in the arms that reach toward you. They are sinew and claw, stronger than any sailor's grip, ready to drag you under without effort. You'd expect her mouth to kiss. It tears. You'd expect the song to end. It doesn't. It rises, louder, brighter, as though your final moments should come with a chorus. What you see is no goddess, no dream. She is hunger, dressed as beauty, a monster cloaked in the mask of desire. Everything about her is engineered to override your will. Every shimmer, every note, every feigned promise is bait, and you are the fish who thought the hook was just another meal. Up close, the truth is hideous. And that truth is this: she never needed to chase you. You were always going to come. The siren is not here to love you. She is here to eat you, and she will. The first hint isn't sight or sound, but scent. It creeps across the water before her shape even rises from the foam, threading itself into the salt-thick air you've been breathing for weeks. At first, you think it's nothing unusual. The ship has always smelled like brine and sweat, mildew clinging to damp planks, and the occasional waft of rotting fish caught in the netting. But this is different. It's sharper, heavier, and clings to the back of your throat in a way that makes you gag before you even know why. It's as though the sea itself has been left to fester, the clean brine soured into something more like a grave. When the wind shifts, it hits you fully. The stench is layered, complex in the worst possible way. At its base, it's rot. Fish left too long in the sun. Bellies split open. Bones drying with a greasy slickness that no salt can purify. Threaded through that is seaweed, not fresh and green, but bloated and black, torn from rocks and left to decay in tidal pools, its slime clinging to every breath. Over it, all hangs the coppery whisper of something unmistakably human, flesh that is softened in water, bodies swollen and pale, the sweet sour reek of decay too far gone for prayer. It's the scent of a battlefield abandoned, of a plague pit stirred, except here it carries over the waves like an invisible hand gripping your face. Every instinct should tell you to run. This is the smell of death, not perfume, not the promise of warmth or comfort. It is the warning nature crafted to keep predators away from poisoned meat. And yet the song is still winding through your skull, wrapping each note around the stench until your mind can't tell which way is up. You breathe in rot, but you taste honey. You swallow bile, but you think it's wine. Your body knows the truth, but your brain, drugged by the melody, refuses to believe it. The sailors around you mutter curses, some gagging, others shoving fingers under their noses as if that could help. Yet none of them move away from the rail. They lean closer, squinting at the horizon, as though the horror carried on the air is instead a promise. The contradiction is maddening. Your stomach cramps, your mouth waters, and though you want to retch, you also want to draw closer, to see the source of the scent that both repels and lures. It's a trap laid not only in sound, but in smell, a net cast wider than you ever realized. Up close, the odor is unbearable. When she surfaces, dripping with foam and seaweed, the air thickens, and you swear you can feel the stink coating your tongue like oil. It seeps into your clothes, clings to your hair, and lodges itself behind your eyes, so that even if you turned away now, you'd never forget it. There's the unmistakable pang of carrion, the reek of gull-pecked flesh, as though she carries a graveyard in her wake. And still, you don't turn. Still you lean forward, drawn not despite it, but because the song convinces you, this is beauty, this is desire, this is everything you ever longed for made manifest. That is the cruelest trick of all. You could have resisted her if she had smelled sweet, if she had woven herself into the trappings of innocence and purity. But no. What drags you closer is the dissonance, the clash between horror and longing, the confusion that overrides reason until your only choice is surrender. You know you are leaning toward rot. You know you are about to embrace a corpse dressed in scales. But the song hums, and the mind bends, and the body obeys. The siren doesn't smell like love. She smells like death. And still, you can't resist. The question circles in your head as the song pulls you closer. What does she actually want from you? Stories say she feasts on sailors, gnawing bones clean and swallowing the marrow, dragging what's left to the seabed where no priest can find you. Other tales insist it's not your flesh she craves at all, but the spectacle, the gurgle of lungs filling with water, the flailing limbs, the panic that flickers in human eyes as hope snuffs out like a candle in a storm. Maybe it doesn't matter. To a siren, your end is either a meal or a performance. Either way, you're providing something she enjoys. If you think of her as an animal, it makes sense. Every predator eats. Her teeth, those sharp little rows tucked behind lips that can shape a hymn, didn't evolve to nibble seaweed. No, they're for piercing, tearing, grinding flesh. Fish, sure. Maybe the odd seal. But a sailor who comes swimming willingly, arms outstretched, as if begging to be gutted, that's the ultimate delicacy. She doesn't have to chase you down, doesn't have to risk injury in a hunt. You march to her as if enchanted by the scent of a roasting feast, and you are the roast. From her point of view, why would she ever give up a trick so efficient? But then there's the other possibility, and it's somehow worse. Perhaps she doesn't need to eat you at all. Perhaps the whole performance, the shimmering body, the twisted beauty, the irresistible song, isn't about sustenance, but sport. Watching humans lose themselves, watching men who pride themselves on strength and reason fling their bodies into the waves just to smash against the rocks, might be all the nourishment she needs. Predators get hungry, but sadists get bored. What if this is her cure for boredom? What if your death is only her entertainment, as fleeting as a street juggler making coins dance before an indifferent crowd? The sea itself seems to play along. When the ship tilts toward the rocks, when sailors throw themselves overboard in droves, when the deck becomes chaos, this is her theater. Every scream, every cracking bone on timber, every splash as another man disappears beneath the waves, it all rises in chorus with her melody. She doesn't need to bite into you when the ocean will do it for her. The jagged reefs shred planks and ribs alike. Salt water fills your chest. Sharks circle, emboldened by the thrashing. The siren doesn't have to stain her claws. She just watches, and sings, and smiles. There are whispers among sailors that some men were never touched by a siren's hand or claw at all. Their bodies were found washed ashore, faces frozen in rapture, skin unmarked except by the sea, as if the song itself had wrung the life from them, leaving husks for the tide to play with. What kind of predator doesn't even need to eat the prey it ensnares? A cruel one, a divine one, something that doesn't hunt for hunger, but for amusement. And then there are darker tales, told in whispers over weak ale, of men dragged under not to be eaten, but to be kept. Bones stacked in caverns below the waves, shells piled into grotesque thrones, faces half preserved in silt. Not consumed, not released, just collected, like a child hoarding dolls. Which is worse, to be devoured quickly and forgotten, or to be remembered as part of her grisly decor for eternity. As you stand there, choking on the smell of rot and salt, swaying with the rhythm of her call, you realize it doesn't matter what her true intention is. Whether she bites your throat open or simply watches you drown, your fate is sealed. You are either dinner or a diversion, and both end the same way: silence, darkness, and the cold grip of the sea. To a siren, you were never a man. You were always just a story, waiting to end. You've heard the story, passed down from old lips and tattered manuscripts. Odysseus, clever as ever, plugging his crew's ears with beeswax so they could row untempted while he lashed himself to the mast. It sounds so simple, so practical. Close your ears, keep your mind, live another day. But that was Homer's Greece, a land where honey was gathered in clay jars, where wax was known, traded, and shaped into candles for the temples of gods. You, poor soul, are in the medieval North, where wax is scarce, hoarded, and far too precious to waste on superstition. The peasants keep candles at church, not in the hands of lice-bitten sailors who can't even afford shoes. When the song drifts across the waves, you do not have a tidy lump of wax waiting to save you. But let's pretend you did. Even if you gouged it into your ears, pressed it deep enough to muffle the world, you'd still feel it. The song isn't just sound. It's vibration. It's rhythm. It's the kind of frequency that lives in your chest, humming against your ribs, until you can't tell whether the voice is outside you or inside your own skull. You block your ears and think you're safe, only to discover the melody reshaping itself in memory, in phantom notes that your brain supplies when deprived of the real thing. It's the same way you hum a song you can't get out of your head, except this one doesn't stop until you've thrown yourself to the sea. The crew tries things, of course. They're desperate men. Some stuff rags into their ears, others smear pitch or tar, so thick it leaves black stains along their temples. But the tar cracks, the cloth loosens, and still the song seeps through. A few take to screaming, shouting obscenities at the wind, trying to drown her out with their own noise. It works for a few heartbeats, but their voices falter, their throats give out, and in the silence that follows the song comes rushing back twice as strong. One man smashes his head against the mast, blood pouring down his face, thinking maybe pain can root him in reality where the music cannot. He lasts longer than most, but when the siren's chorus crests, he leaps overboard anyway, skull split, teeth broken, and still smiling. The cruelest part is how your brain twists the muffled notes into something even more alluring. You think silence might save you, but silence turns the fragments into puzzle pieces your mind insists on finishing. That half-heard hum becomes a lullaby your mother sang. That muffled rhythm feels like the prayer bells of your village church. The gaps become personalized, tailored illusions that hit you deeper than the original song ever could. Wax or no wax, your own brain betrays you. And then there's the ship itself. You can't plug the wood. The mast hums like a lyre string, each note of her song vibrating down the timbers, rattling through your bones as surely as if she were whispering into your ear. The deck creaks in rhythm with the melody. The very air tastes like it's been flavored with her voice. Try as you might, you cannot stop the world from carrying her to you. Maybe Odysseus managed it. Maybe he had divine favor, gods bending the rules so his wax trick worked. But you are not Odysseus. You're a nameless sailor on a leaking medieval cog, and no god is watching you. You have no wax, no clever plan, no heroic destiny. You have salt in your hair, mold in your bread, and a death song in your ears. The wax in your ears trick is a lie. You still hear muffled beauty. You still jump. The idea seems clever at first, a trick borrowed from a legend. Tie yourself to the mast, let the ropes bite into your skin, and you'll survive what your weaker crewmates cannot. The logic is seductively simple. If you can't move, you can't leap. And if you can't leap, the sea cannot claim you. But the story you remember never told you about the agony of waiting, of being the one man bound in place as the rest of the crew tears itself apart. It never told you how rope feels when it tightens against flesh swollen with salt water and sweat, how every shift of the ship grinds fibers into your skin until you bleed. The mast becomes your prison, and you are the prisoner who has sentenced himself. At first, you believe it works. You thrash, yes, but you do not fall. The cords dig into your arms, your chest, your thighs, holding you fast while the song swells around you. You think you've found the loophole, the little gap in the curse that Odysseus slipped through centuries ago. And then you look around. You see your shipmates who did not bind themselves, men you've slept beside in hammocks, men you've shared rotten bread and guttering laughter with. They don't just fall. They lunge, scrambling over railings, shoving each other aside, clawing to be first in the water. One man grins as he dives headfirst into the foam. Another laughs so hard his lungs burst with seawater before he's even gone under. You cannot move to stop them, cannot even close your eyes. You are forced to witness, and witnessing is its own torment. Every splash feels like a bell tolling your failure. You try to shout, but the song drowns your voice. You pull against the ropes, instinct screaming at you to follow, to hurl yourself in after them. But the knots hold. You're alive, yes, but in this moment life feels more like punishment. You are the only audience to a massacre. Each death is another nail hammered into your mind, another weight that will drag you down even if the sea never touches you. And then there's the cruel truth about rope. It frays. Salt stiffens it. Sea spray rots it. Strain unravels it. You can tie yourself to the mast as tightly as you like. But wood splits, fibers snap, and the sea is patient. It only takes one heave of the ship against a hidden reef, one groan of timber giving way, and suddenly your bond is no bond at all. The ropes slacken, the mast shudders, and you're free again, but not safe. Now there's nothing between you and the song, and with your muscles primed from straining against the bonds, you hurl yourself forward with twice the force. You don't stumble like the others. You fly. Even if the ropes hold, the outcome is not salvation. The song does not weaken because you resisted. It only festers inside you, building pressure in your skull until your teeth ache and your eyes burn. Your body becomes a battlefield. The ropes on one side, the song on the other, and you in the middle, tearing apart. Some men who tied themselves to the mast went mad before the night ended. They screamed, begged, cursed gods and devils, until the sound of their voices made the rest of the crew wish they'd drowned earlier. By the time the ropes were cut, there was nothing human left to save. You thought binding yourself to the mast would buy you time. Instead, it buys you a front row seat to the end of everything you know, with no option to look away. And when the ropes snap, and they always snap, you don't get to choose whether you live or die. The sea makes that choice for you. Rope doesn't save you. It only delays the inevitable. You've heard the stories since childhood, whispered by mothers at hearth fires and carved into the painted wood of chapel doors. St. Nicholas, patron of sailors, protector of the lost, guardian of men who brave the sea's black mouth. His name is the last thing muttered by fishermen before pushing off in the dawn mist, and the first thing begged when storms hurl their nets back in their faces. He is supposed to be there, watching, intervening, stretching out a holy hand to guide your fragile plank of a ship away from the jagged teeth of the coast. In the taverns of every port, you've seen little icons nailed above doorways, his face worn smooth by greasy fingers tapping in quick prayer before the ale flows. He is the saint of survival, the one constant hope in a life where waves kill as easily as blades. So when the song slithers into your ears and coils around your spine, when men begin hurling themselves into the surf, it is to Nicholas you pray. You kneel on planks slick with salt, fold your filthy hands, and rasp his name through cracked lips. Your voice joins the chorus of the crew, a dozen voices breaking into hoarse cries that sound more like animal keening than liturgy. Some remember scraps of hymns, half-forgotten verses mumbled between sobs. Others babble promises of offerings, candles, coins, entire shrines, if only he'll hear them tonight. It is not pretty. Faith never looks pretty when it's clawing for air. But there's no answer. The sea doesn't part. The song doesn't falter. The waves don't grow gentle. Instead, the ship lists harder, wood groaning as though mocking your pleas. A man kisses the little pendant at his neck, carved with the saint's face, and when he lifts it away, he laughs. Not with joy, but madness. He throws it overboard like a worthless trinket and dives after it. You hear the crunch as he strikes the rocks before the water swallows him whole. The silence from heaven is louder than the song. You keep waiting for a sign. A sudden stillness in the wind, a star breaking through the storm clouds, anything that says someone is listening. But all that comes is more salt spray, more shrieks, more bodies toppling like broken dolls into the abyss. The mast looms above you like a crucifix, and you can't decide whether you are the worshiper kneeling at its base or the sacrifice nailed to its spine. The church taught you the sea is a battlefield of souls. Sail too far, and you risk more than storms. You risk demons, devils, unholy things that claw for your spirit. Priests thundered that sirens were Satan's handmaidens, luring sailors to sin before dragging them to hell. Maybe they were right. Maybe the song is proof that the ocean belongs to the devil more than it ever belonged to Nicholas. If that's true, then your prayers aren't climbing upward. They're sinking, swallowed by the same abyss that's already taken half your ship. Some men break under the silence. They stop praying and start bargaining, not with saints, but with the song itself. They whisper promises to the unseen voice, pledges of loyalty, devotion, anything, if it will only let them glimpse her beauty. They drop to their knees, not in holy reverence, but in hunger, mouths open like dogs begging for scraps. And the song rewards them, not with mercy, but with madness. They sprint for the railing, eyes glazed, and disappear into foam. You keep your prayers steady. You mumble Nicholas's name again and again, clinging to the syllables like driftwood. But deep down, you know, tonight he isn't coming. Not for you. Not for any of you. The sea is answering. The siren is answering, and she always answers with death. The miracle you begged for finally happens. The sea spits you out instead of keeping you. One moment you're tumbling in its black throat, lungs burning, arms clawing uselessly against the pull of the tide, and the next, you're slammed onto wet sand with the force of a hammer. Your chest heaves, your stomach lurches, and salt water gushes from your mouth like vomit. You're alive. Somehow, impossibly, you've been spared. You collapse against the ground, clinging to the pebbles and seaweed as if they might drift away too. Your body shakes with relief and terror. You survived the siren's song. You survived the wreck. For the first time since the nightmare began, you believe the worst might be over. But land is not salvation. It's just another battlefield. Your body is wrung out, every muscle trembling, every breath jagged and shallow. The cold is immediate and merciless. The sea stripped you down to nothing, and now the wind finishes the job, slicing through wet wool and chilling your bones from the inside out. Hypothermia doesn't roar like drowning. It creeps. Your teeth chatter so violently you bite your tongue. Your fingers go numb, stiffening until they can't even curl around the driftwood you cling to. You try to stand, to stumble inland, but your legs give out. You crawl like an animal, dragging yourself away from the surf that nearly killed you, only to collapse again in the sand. The cold seeps deeper, heavy as stone. You tell yourself you'll rest for just a moment, just to gather strength. But the truth is, sleep is the last trick hypothermia plays. If you do rise and stagger further inland, survival doesn't grow kinder. Food is a dream you can't reach. Your stomach gnaws at itself, twisting with hunger. But the only thing you find are bitter plants you don't recognize and scraps of shellfish left rotting in tide pools. Your throat is torn raw from swallowing seawater, and when you try to drink from a stream, your belly revolts. Starvation is slower than drowning, but no less cruel. It drains you, shrinks you, hollows you out until you're little more than bones draped in rags. You traded a violent death for a lingering one, each hour another nail in the coffin you drag behind you. And then there are the animals. The forest you crawl toward isn't empty. Wolves haunt the edges of villages, their yellow eyes watching from the trees. Boars root through the undergrowth, tusks ready to rip open anything weaker than themselves. Even stray dogs, half wild and hungry, prowl the coastlines, drawn by the scent of shipwrecks. To them, you are not a survivor. You are carrion. A limping, bleeding, half-dead thing that can't fight back. At night, every snapping twig is a threat. Every rustle in the brush, a reminder that you are no longer at the top of any chain. Medieval land isn't safer than the sea. No inns appear on the horizon, no warm hearths with bread and broth waiting for lost sailors. You are stranded in a world where every bite of food must be fought for, where strangers are as likely to rob you as help you, where sickness blooms from the smallest cut. Infection festers in your wounds. Fever burns through your body, and there is no healer to whisper charms or grind herbs into a cure. You came ashore. Yes, but you came ashore in an age where even the fortunate die young. The Siren's gift was not mercy. It was postponement. She let you believe you'd beaten her song, let you crawl gasping onto land and whisper a shaky prayer of thanks. But what she really gave you was time to realize that there are worse ways to die than sinking fast beneath the waves. You escaped drowning, only to become another corpse on the shore, and the sea always comes back to claim what it left behind. One siren is disaster enough. Her voice alone can hollow you out, strip your reason clean, and replace it with the blind compulsion to leap toward her, rocks, and death be damned. But myths never stop at one. The older stories whisper of flocks, of whole choruses drifting across the waves, their songs layered in eerie harmonies that would make even the most disciplined mind split apart. Imagine not just one melody carving into your brain, but 3, 5, a dozen, each one weaving into the others until the sound is less music and more prison bars around your thoughts. You wouldn't just hear it. You would dissolve into it. The sailors who told these tales swore it was the harmony that made the madness unbearable. A single voice might be resisted for a few minutes if you had the will of iron and the luck of gods. But when the voices rose together, each tone amplifying the other, there was no space left in the mind to cling to. The sound filled every hollow, every dark corner, until your own inner voice, the one whispering caution, drowned beneath the rising tide. You stopped being yourself and became just another instrument in their orchestra of ruin. The most terrifying part wasn't that you couldn't fight it. It was that you no longer wanted to. A ship's lookout could swear he saw 3 figures on the rocks, their hair gleaming like gold in the sun. But the helmsman might claim he counted 7, each with wings spread wide, their songs crashing together like surf. Down in the hold, the sick and half-starved swore they heard choirs of angels drifting just above the water, promising mercy and rest. Yet when the wrecks were later found, the bones scattered on the shore were stripped clean, gnawed as though by predators who didn't even need to hunt. The stories blurred, but the theme was constant. The more voices you heard, the less chance you had to survive. Modern minds might laugh it off, chalk it up to fear mixed with exhaustion, to the human brain's tendency to invent patterns in sound and shadow. But consider the way music affects you now. One song on the radio can loop in your head for hours, whether you like it or not. A perfect harmony can make your chest ache, your eyes sting, your pulse quicken as if something primal inside you has been lit. Now imagine that same sensation weaponized, sharpened into a lure, and multiplied until your senses can't separate the threads. There's no logic strong enough to stand against it. There's no wall high enough to block it out. And flocks of sirens meant more than just music. They were a hunting strategy. One lured from the cliffs, while another circled to the side, her voice pouring down like honey from the opposite direction, confusing the ear, twisting the ship's course until it dashed itself against stone. Some myths even describe them as rival choruses, groups competing for prey, their songs dueling across the waves until the sailors, trapped between them, tore themselves apart just to end the noise. To face one was death. To face many was lunacy carved into flesh. The cruelty of it lay in the illusion of choice. Which voice would you follow? The one promising warmth, or the one crooning of lost loves, or the one whispering your name in a tone no human mouth could mimic? You couldn't choose wrong, because every path ended the same. The rocks didn't care which melody you preferred. The sea didn't distinguish between soprano or alto. Your bones would still break against the cliffs, and the songs would continue, rising over the crash of waves, as if your death was nothing more than another verse in an endless hymn. One siren can tempt you. Many sirens can unmake you. And the cruelest truth is that their harmony doesn't just pull you closer. It makes you grateful for the destruction waiting on the shore. You thought the siren was bad news? She's just one chapter in the encyclopedia of maritime misery. The medieval sea was not some sparkling Disney backdrop where friendly crabs sang songs about following your dreams. It was a graveyard, wearing a thin disguise of waves. Every time your ship left the harbor, the ocean spun a wheel of death, and you never knew what it would land on. Maybe it was storms, maybe it was monsters, maybe it was other men with swords, or maybe it was just the quiet cruelty of hunger stretching across weeks at sea. But whichever way it tilted, your odds were rotten. Start with the storms. You've seen rain, you've heard thunder, you've felt a stiff breeze on land and thought it dramatic. That's child's play. Out here, a storm is not weather, it's punishment. When the clouds mass black on the horizon and the wind howls like wolves through the rigging, you are not bracing for discomfort. You are bracing for obliteration. Your ship, this pathetic wooden box lashed together with nails and prayers, will groan and shudder as if it already knows it wasn't built for this. A single wrong gust can rip your sails apart. A wave tall as a church can swallow you whole. There is no weathering the storm. There is only hoping you drown before the ship crushes you against its splintering hull. And storms are the predictable horrors. At least they follow some natural rhythm. The sea serpents, though, they're another matter. Every port city has tales of something vast moving beneath the surface, long as a cathedral and hungrier than famine. Sailors describe them as snakes the width of streets, as scaled leviathans rising up to snatch men off decks like breadcrumbs. Were they real? Who cares? You believed it if you were out there. Every shadow beneath the waves, every ripple at night, every patch of water that bulged and swirled seemed to announce that some unholy creature was circling your ship, waiting to take its turn. And when the sea is already trying to kill you, it doesn't take much imagination to believe there's something else down there helping it along. Then there's the Kraken. Not a polite, manageable octopus, but a nightmare with tentacles thick as tree trunks. It doesn't need to eat you. It just needs to wrap itself around your ship and test how fragile your carpentry really is. A medieval cog wasn't designed for grappling matches with undersea titans. If the storm didn't splinter the wood, the Kraken could finish the job, dragging men screaming into the water where they'd vanish in bubbles and red froth. Sailors whispered that the sea wasn't empty but full of things so enormous they blotted out the sky when they surfaced. Maybe those were lies. Maybe those were exaggerations. But when every third voyage ended with silence and wreckage, the line between myth and truth blurred easily. And just in case you thought it was only monsters and weather waiting to gut you, remember the pirates. Men just like you, only hungrier, crueler, and faster. They didn't lure you with songs. They didn't need to. Their music was the crack of grappling hooks landing on your rails, the stomp of boots across your deck, and the shriek of steel pulled from scabbards. If they were feeling merciful, they killed you quick. If not, you might find yourself chained, whipped, and sold in some foreign market. Some sailors muttered that pirates were worse than monsters because at least a sea serpent didn't laugh while it stripped you bare. And beneath it all, always waiting, was starvation. A voyage dragged on longer than expected. The salted fish ran out, the water turned to slime, and you found yourself gnawing on leather straps, wondering how much longer before someone suggested a more human solution. The sea didn't need sirens or serpents to ruin you. It could kill with emptiness alone. So yes, the sirens are a horror. But they were just one contestant in the pageant of doom. Out here, death didn't sing a single song. It came in choirs, storms, and serpents, and pirates, and hunger, all harmonizing in one dreadful chorus. The only real surprise was which verse you'd die on. The medieval imagination had a habit of turning everything it feared into a monster. Wolves were greed, dragons were sin, and sirens, they weren't just about shipwrecks and drowned sailors. They were lust incarnate. To the moralists of the age, sirens weren't simply creatures that sang men to their deaths. They were warnings carved out of myth, reminders that female desire, or even just female presence, was something men could never hope to survive. When you opened a bestiary or listened to a sermon, the story wasn't about dangerous seas, it was about dangerous women. Preachers thundered from pulpits that the siren was a symbol of seduction, a living metaphor for how a man could be lured from the straight path of righteousness into ruin. She was temptation with scales, a melody with claws. If a sailor lost himself to her song, the lesson wasn't simply that he had drowned, but that he had fallen prey to carnal urges that would damn his soul as surely as his body sank beneath the waves. The sea was the setting, yes, but the real battlefield was always the flesh, and in their eyes, it was the woman who bore the blame. This wasn't an accident. The Middle Ages were steeped in a worldview that tied sin directly to female form. Eve had tempted Adam, Delilah had cut Samson's hair, and now the siren's song became the new allegory for male weakness, disguised as female wickedness. Every illustration of a bird woman or fish woman luring sailors wasn't just a monster manual entry. It was propaganda. The message was clear. If men strayed, if they faltered, if they found themselves dashed against the rocks of ruin, the fault lay not in their own choices, but in the beguiling danger of women who refused to remain silent. It's easy to see the pattern. Medieval culture loved to conflate water with danger and women with chaos. Rivers, seas, and lakes were imagined as feminine, and feminine meant uncontrollable, seductive, and perilous. To sail was to risk not just the elements, but the very embodiment of temptation. A calm ocean could turn to storm. A beautiful woman could turn to monster, and both were cast in the same mold of mistrust. The siren fused them together, the ultimate warning that nature and womanhood alike could not be mastered by man without a price. And yet, beneath the thunder of sermons and the heavy ink of bestiaries, you can catch a glimpse of something else, a fascination they couldn't quite smother. If the siren was purely a figure of loathing, why linger so much on her beauty? Why dwell on the sweetness of her voice, the elegance of her form from afar, before revealing the horror up close? It was as if even in condemning her, medieval minds were enchanted. She was meant to be a lesson, but she was also a fantasy they couldn't put down, a projection of desire that lingered like a forbidden song in the imagination. Of course, none of this made the world any safer for women. When a myth like the siren is hammered into you from every direction, stories, scripture, art. It reinforces the idea that a woman's allure is inherently dangerous, that her beauty is a trap, that her voice should be silenced before it destroys men. The siren's claws and teeth were never just hers. They were the anxieties of a society that feared what it could not control, drawn in ink and vellum so that every sailor, every listener, would learn to equate feminine presence with peril. So when you hear the siren in the medieval imagination, you're not only hearing the ocean, you're hearing centuries of patriarchal fear given melody. Her song is lust, her body is temptation, her very existence is a sermon illustration that ends in wreckage. The rocks are real, the drowning is real, but the wider symbolism is sharper still. The siren was never just a creature of the sea. She was a cage built from fear of women, her legend a hymn to control disguised as a cautionary tale. And like all good hymns, it stuck, echoing across the centuries long after the sailors were gone. Imagine standing at the rail of your medieval ship, salt spray stinging your eyes, while a voice threads its way into your skull like silk and fire at the same time. You know you shouldn't lean closer. You know you shouldn't follow the sound. The older sailors mutter prayers, grip talismans, clutch at scraps of cloth tied around their necks. Everyone knows what's happening. Everyone knows this is how men die. But the song is still there, curling through your mind like a hook sinking deeper into flesh. It isn't even subtle. It tells you it's going to kill you, and you still move closer. That's the cruelty of it. That's the brilliance. The siren isn't just a monster in feathers and scales. She's addiction personified, a voice that promises you everything while taking everything. She doesn't need to drag you into the sea because you'll do it yourself, smiling, humming the tune as if it's the only thing that has ever mattered. If you've ever scrolled endlessly through a feed at 3 a.m, eyes burning while your brain whispers just one more, you already understand the shape of the spell. This isn't magic in the glittering fantasy sense. It's the kind of neurochemical lockpick that works across centuries. Medieval sailors just called it sorcery. You might call it dopamine. The outcome is the same. It's the gambler rolling dice, convinced the next throw will be the one that changes everything. It's the person hunched over a glowing screen, thumb flicking upward again and again, each new clip or image promising a tiny hit of something sweet and fleeting. The siren's melody works the same way. Each note is the possibility of ecstasy, a rush of feeling that floods you with certainty that this is worth dying for. You know it's a lie even as you're sinking. But you can't let go. You don't want to let go. And, like every addiction, it isolates you. Sailors don't leap into the water in neat rows, holding hands. They tear away from each other, clawing to be first, snarling at the very men they've shared bread with for months. The song convinces each of them that he alone is chosen. He alone is meant to reach that impossible paradise shimmering ahead. The others become rivals, obstacles, enemies. In the same way, modern compulsions don't bind people together so much as they trap each one in their own looping orbit. You're surrounded by voices, screens, lights, but you are utterly alone inside the pull. There's a reason the siren song is described as beautiful, not pleasant, not nice, beautiful in the way that hurts. Like the chorus of your favorite song, the one you replay until it blurs, or the crackle of coins in a slot machine just before the lights flash. Beauty is pain sharpened into sweetness, and the siren makes it unbearable to imagine silence ever again. Even if you manage to cover your ears, even if you stuff wax into them or shout prayers until your throat tears, the memory of it lingers. Addiction isn't just about the moment of use, it's about the haunting that follows. Medieval men told themselves the siren was supernatural, because that was easier than admitting how human the weakness really was. Call it witchcraft, call it demons, call it the devil himself perched on the waves. It all boiled down to the same thing. They couldn't say no. Neither can we, when we sit in the glow of devices designed to hijack the same reward systems and the same hungers. What makes it worse is that at least a siren lived on a distant shore. Now the song lives in your pocket, buzzing every hour, promising escape in exchange for your time, your sleep, your attention. The siren as addiction is the most honest version of her. She doesn't kill you with claws or teeth. She kills you by convincing you that you want to die for her, that the plunge into dark water is worth it, because the moment before the fall felt so good. And that's the kind of death people have been chasing, in one form or another, since the first sailor leaned too far over the rail and smiled at the voice calling his name. The sea has always been the stage, and humans have always been the fools who think they own it. You stand on your medieval ship, patched sails flapping like tattered banners, believing that because you can cross the channel or fish a little further from shore, you've somehow mastered the ocean. But the sea has never belonged to you. It only lends you space, and only for as long as it chooses. The siren is not just a monster hidden in the waves. She is the ocean's laughter at your arrogance. She is the voice reminding you that you are soft, weak, and doomed the moment you believe otherwise. The trap works because you think you're clever. You've braved storms before, hauled in nets heavy with cod, survived winters that froze men solid at the oars. You believe endurance is enough, that toughness can outmatch the chaos of the sea. And then you hear the song, sweet, impossible, fragile as a thread of glass, and you follow. You steer your vessel into jagged rocks, as though it's the most natural thing in the world. It isn't violence that kills you, not directly. It's trust. Trust in your own senses. Trust in the idea that if you want something badly enough, it must be attainable. The siren shows you how wrong you are. Nature does not care about your desires. The wind doesn't shift because you need it to. The tide doesn't slow to let your ship glide smoothly home. The storm doesn't break out of mercy for the man clinging to driftwood. And the siren, whether you see her as beast or metaphor, doesn't sing because she wants you. She sings because the sea demands sacrifices, and you were foolish enough to put yourself within reach. For the medieval sailor, she was a feathered demon or a scaled enchantress, proof that God's punishments walked the earth in feminine form. For you, standing centuries later, she looks like something else, a reminder that humans consistently mistake dominion for understanding. Build ships of oak, lace them with iron, chant prayers to saints, and carve protective charms into the hull. It doesn't matter. The sea will take what it wants, when it wants, and your preparations are only theater. The siren is the sea's stagehand, pulling the curtain closed on your little act of defiance. Think of the way a shoreline looks when you're desperate for land. Green hills shimmer in the distance. A sandy cove beckons like salvation. The song swells, and you believe it. You believe nature is inviting you in, welcoming you after your suffering. But the closer you get, the sharper the rocks. The cove is no beach at all, but a graveyard of shattered hulls. You didn't discover a haven. You walked into a snare. That's the lesson. Beauty in the natural world doesn't exist for you. It exists for itself. And if you mistake it for generosity, you're finished. The arrogance is ancient. Fishermen in tiny coracles believed their patron saint would shield them. Explorers charting new waters believed God's mandate gave them protection. Kings funded galleys, believing that control of the sea meant control of destiny. And yet every one of them feared the siren's call because deep down, they knew the truth. You can build all the myths you like to explain why men steer toward death, but underneath, the explanation is simple. Humans cannot accept that they are prey in a world they pretend to dominate. Even now, when satellites track weather patterns and sonar maps the ocean floor, the siren still waits in the waves. Not in the literal sense, but in the trap of every tide you underestimate, every storm you gamble against, every coastline you think you've tamed. Her song is the hubris that whispers you can win against forces older and stronger than you will ever be. It is the fatal belief that mastery is possible when survival itself is a temporary concession. The sea doesn't need the siren to kill you. It has waves, rocks, currents, and silence deep enough to swallow whole continents. But the siren is the flourish, the final mocking smile. She makes you participate in your own undoing. You lean forward, heart thrumming with longing, convinced you're about to seize something eternal. And then you're gone, another broken mast tangled in the surf. The ocean doesn't remember your name. It never cared. It never will. The wreck is only the beginning. You might imagine that once the ship shatters against the rocks and the sea swallows the screaming, the story ends in silence. But the ocean is generous with suffering. It spits bodies back onto the shore, twisted and pale, eyes bloated open, as if they'd seen something worse beneath the waves than drowning itself. Seabirds descend in clouds, tearing at the bellies of men who once swaggered with sea shanties on their lips. The tide doesn't carry you home. It carries you to rot. If you survive long enough to be one of the gasping few clinging to driftwood, coughing up salt and blood, the nightmare doesn't ease. There's no Coast Guard waiting with blankets and hot soup. No helicopters swooping in to pull you out. Instead, the shore belongs to whatever kingdom claims it, and medieval kingdoms don't do charity. If you're unlucky enough to wash up on enemy sands, congratulations. You've just traded drowning for chains. Survivors of wrecks were often taken as prisoners, marched inland barefoot, stripped of what little dignity the sea had left behind. Some were ransomed if they were valuable. Most weren't. And if you stagger back to a friendly port, you're hardly better off. The moment word spreads that your ship has gone down, whispers start. Men blame mutiny, cowardice, or God's wrath. Maybe you're accused of inviting bad luck, cursed by your sins. You may have survived drowning, but now you're tried by rumor, and rumor is just another kind of execution. A hungry town staring at a cargo lost to the sea doesn't want excuses. It wants blood. Even those who avoid chains and judgment have nothing to look forward to but a slow, grinding descent. Wreck survivors often returned, broken in body and mind. Saltwater ulcers ate at their skin, frost clung to their lungs, fevers raged in the aftermath of swallowing the sea. Starvation gnawed at them in the days drifting without food, and once back on land, hunger never truly left. Men who staggered away from wrecks often ended up beggars, haunted and half-mad, trading their stories of sirens and storms for a crust of bread no one really wanted to give. Survival didn't mean freedom. It meant dragging your death out over years instead of minutes. And always, the corpses. The coastline becomes a gallery of failure, each wave depositing another swollen relic of the voyage. Mothers, brothers, and widows come searching, clinging to scraps of clothing, recognizing faces that the sea had already half consumed. The ocean didn't just kill. It displayed its work, as though it took pride in its cruelty. Imagine the stench of dozens of drowned men bloating in the sun, their flesh splitting as though the sea had stitched them with salt, only to unravel them again on the shore. That smell was the closing note of the siren's song, lingering long after the voices had gone quiet. And the sailors who survived, those few unlucky enough to remember every note, carried the melody inside them. They dreamed of it in fever, hummed it in delirium, sometimes staggered to the edge of new docks only to leap, compelled to finish the death they had somehow escaped the first time. There was no recovery. The song lived in their skulls, gnawed at their sanity until even solid ground couldn't save them. No ballad celebrates these endings. No tavern shanty belts out the tale of the man who limped home and wasted away in poverty, mumbling about claws in the surf. Songs are for heroes, not for survivors too broken to tell their stories without trembling. The aftermath of a wreck leaves no space for glory. Only a trail of bodies, a handful of prisoners, and a legacy of misery that spreads like rot through every port it touches. That's the truth behind the siren's promise. It doesn't end when the ship splinters or when the waves close over your head. It ends days, weeks, even years later, in a cell, in a gutter, in a shallow grave, unmarked by anything but the memory of a voice you couldn't resist. There is no triumphant escape, no lesson learned that grants you peace. There is only the slow spiral down, a descent that keeps teaching you, again and again, that no one outlives the sea's appetite. There's no happy ending. There never was. Living through the wreck doesn't mean you've beaten anything. It means you're cursed to drag around the memory, to stumble back into a world that doesn't want you anymore. The sea doesn't simply spit you out and move on. It leaves you marked, a man hollowed out by something no one else can see. You return to land, but land doesn't feel real. The boards beneath your feet don't sway, and yet you still rock like a drunk, waiting for the next wave that never comes. Your sleep is shallow, your dreams thick with salt water. You close your eyes and hear the song again, muffled under your own panicked heartbeat, and you wake gasping, certain you're drowning all over again. The body doesn't forgive what the ocean does to it. Salt sores split open along your arms and legs, festering in the weeks after. The water you swallowed sits in your lungs like damp coals, igniting fevers that don't break. Infection is as sure a killer as the rocks were, only slower and less merciful. You drag yourself through days on land, coughing blood, bones rattling and skin gone thin and yellow, and the villagers shake their heads, muttering that you won't see the next frost. They're usually right. Winter cuts down the remnants of shipwreck survivors like wheat. And if disease doesn't finish you, hunger or cold will. But the wounds inside run deeper than the ones on your body. You're haunted by the song in ways no priest's blessing can banish. It plays when you hear a woman humming, when wind whistles through a shutter, even when your own breath rattles at night. Some men go mad in the months after, tearing at their ears with broken nails, trying to claw the melody out before it drives them fully insane. Others slip away quietly, walking into rivers or over cliffs, answering the echo they can't silence. Survival is just a different road to the same end, and the world doesn't let you forget either. The church preaches that those who heard the voices were tainted, touched by demons, their survival more proof of sin than miracle. Neighbors whisper about bargains struck with sea witches, about lustful thoughts given flesh on the tide. Superstition paints a target on your back, and you learn quickly to keep your head down, to stay quiet about what you saw. But silence doesn't erase the eyes of those who already think you're cursed. You become the man no one wants to share a meal with. The sailor children are told not to touch, as though your skin carries the sea's poison still. So you drink. Weak ale when you can afford it, rotgut when you can't. Anything to smother the memory, to fuzz the edges of the song. But drink never dulls it completely, and more often it drags you deeper into it, until you're weeping in the corner of a tavern while other men laugh. They call you salt-addled, sea-broken, and they aren't wrong. You were a sailor once, and now you're just driftwood, washed up and rotting inland. Your hands shake when you try to tie knots, so no captain wants you back on deck. Your body breaks down before you can swing an oar, so no galley master wastes rations on you. You're left jobless, shivering, coughing, spitting salt and blood into the dirt. The sea gave you back, but it made certain you'd never be useful to anyone again. And that's the cruelest part. You think survival should feel like victory, like proof that you escaped something others didn't. But the truth is, you didn't escape at all. You're still drowning, just slower. Each day, another inch pulled under. The song doesn't fade. The sickness doesn't heal. The stares don't soften. Even if you live, you don't. The sea alone was enough to terrify men, but it was the stories that made it unbearable. No shipwreck survivor ever came back with a calm recollection of what happened. They staggered into ports, coughing brine and fever, and the words that fell from their mouths were half confession, half curse. What they described was rarely precise. The cliffs grew taller, the waves stronger, the voices more divine and more hellish with each telling. A man who had seen nothing more than a shadow in the spray swore he'd looked into the face of a creature that was half angel, half corpse. Another, who never heard more than the wind howling through the rigging, claimed he'd listened to a choir of unearthly beauty, promising him paradise. Fear bloated their words like dead men floating in the surf, and those words traveled faster than any ship. In taverns where sailors gathered, the siren became more than a danger of the sea. It became a character, a villain painted anew every night. Some insisted she was a pale woman with hair like golden ropes, standing waist-deep in the foam. Others swore she was bird-like, with talons sharp enough to cut through oak. And still others whispered that she was not one, but many, a legion of singing monsters who feasted on men's flesh. Each retelling warped her shape further, until it hardly mattered what was true. What mattered was the feeling, the same shiver that crawled down every spine when the story reached its crescendo, the same hush that fell when the storyteller lowered his voice to a whisper and said, "And then," she sang. The human mind fills gaps with monsters, and in the medieval world, there were nothing but gaps. A strange noise in the rigging was never just the wind. It was the distant echo of her call. A white crest on the horizon was no ordinary wave. It was her hand breaking the surface. Even birds that cried too sweetly above the masts could be mistaken for warnings, omens that she was near. The truth, that most disasters came from storms, reefs, and poor luck, was less interesting than the myth that the sea itself had chosen you as prey. And men, in their fear and in their boredom, preferred the myth. The more these stories spread, the more power the siren gained without ever lifting a claw. She haunted sailors before they even left harbor, lurking in the back of their minds as they kissed wives and children goodbye. She traveled inland too, far from the spray, slipping into the mouths of priests who used her as proof of the devil's snares, and into the ears of wives who fretted that their husband's lust would betray them at sea. Even boys who had never seen the ocean whispered about her by the hearth, daring each other to walk out into the woods at night and listen for her song. She became the nightmare that was everywhere, and the less men saw her, the more they imagined her. And imagination is a crueler trap than the rocks. When a sailor believes he is already doomed, he makes himself easy prey. The fear loosens his grip on the tiller, shakes his hands when tying the rigging, robs him of sleep when he needs it most. He carries his own death with him before the sea has to lift a finger. By the time the ship drifts near the cliffs, where real sirens may or may not wait, half the crew has already surrendered in spirit. They are primed to hear her song, desperate to explain their own terror as something more than just fear. So, the cycle feeds itself. The stories grow wilder, the imaginations darker, the deaths more certain. Each survivor, if survivor is the right word, returns not only broken, but carrying another seed of terror to plant in taverns and chapels. The siren thrives in those words, her reach stretching farther inland with every tale told by men too shaken to know they were giving her power. The sea kills quickly. The stories kill forever. You were doomed long before the song began. Your voyage started with hunger gnawing at your stomach, salted fish that burned your tongue with rot, bread green with mold, and water that tasted like rust and sickness. The stench of wet wood clung to everything. Rats picked at your scraps, and lice burrowed into your scalp until scratching became a second heartbeat. The ship itself was a coffin with sails, creaking and leaking. Every gust of wind a reminder that the sea wanted you dead. Life was misery already, a slow erosion of body and spirit. Then the music came. At first it was faint, like a memory you couldn't place, threading itself between the slap of waves and the groan of rigging. It didn't announce itself as danger. It came as beauty, something alien to your suffering, like fresh water in a desert. And because you were desperate for anything that wasn't rot or fear, you leaned toward it. That's how it worked. Not by force, but by pulling at the softest part of you, the part still capable of longing. The rest was easy. The closer you drew, the worse it became. You stopped hearing the waves. You stopped feeling the cold wind. The sound filled everything, wrapped your thoughts like a net, and turned your fellow sailors into animals. They shoved, clawed, begged to leap overboard. You told yourself you were stronger, but your grip slipped from the ropes, and you leaned farther over the rail, staring at the water with a hunger you couldn't explain. You didn't see the cliffs ahead. You didn't smell the rot beneath the sweetness of the voice. You didn't notice the rocks breaking the waves into knives. You only knew that nothing mattered more than getting closer. And that's when the sea claimed you. Sometimes it happened fast. The ship splintered against the hidden reefs, your chest filling with salt water in a panic of thrashing limbs. Sometimes it was slower, crueler, a jump overboard, woolen clothes dragging you down, your last breath swallowed, while the surface seemed only an arm's reach away. Or maybe you survived the crash long enough to cling to planks, your skin cracking in the cold, your strength bleeding out while sharks circled in the froth. Whether you drowned quickly or died slowly, the ending was the same. If you lived long enough to crawl ashore, you'd only trade one kind of misery for another. Hypothermia wrapped around you like a shroud. Your stomach turned hollow with starvation, and wolves or brigands waited for your weakness. Maybe infection bloomed in the salt-burned cuts on your hands, festering until you rotted alive. Even survival wasn't survival. It was only death with more steps. And yet, the cruelest part wasn't the siren's teeth or the rocks beneath the waves. The cruelest part was belief itself. You didn't need the monster to be real for it to kill you. The stories were enough. The terror passed down in whispers made you hesitate when you should have steered, or lunge when you should have held firm. Fear fogged your mind until you couldn't tell storm from sorcery, hunger from hallucination. Even in silence, even if no creature waited at the cliffs, your mind supplied her song, and that was all it took. That's why you wouldn't survive. Not because sirens were real, but because men believed they were. And belief is its own kind of drowning. The sea has always been indifferent. It doesn't need claws or songs to kill you. It only needs you to imagine them, and then you'll do the rest yourself. So tonight, when you slip earbuds in and scroll to some song you've heard 100 times before, think about the luxury of it. The music fills your head but doesn't drag you toward jagged cliffs. The rhythm seizes your body but doesn't force you to leap into black water. You can close your eyes, let the sound carry you, and know that when the last note ends, you'll still be breathing. Be grateful. Because 500 years ago, music wasn't just entertainment. It was the last thing you'd ever hear.